Good morning. My name is Matthew Weinstein with Voices for Utah Children. 1 week from today, the Utah legislature is expected to go into a special session where they will be making a fateful choice about how to close the budget gap that's been caused in the Utah state budget by the coronavirus recession. And they basically have two choices. One choice, the one they seem to be leaning toward at the moment, is to carry out hundreds of millions of dollars in budget cuts to education, public health, poverty relief, housing, disability services, homeless services, and other critical needs in the midst of a pandemic and a recession, which would not only disproportionately impact low-income, minority, and rural Utahns, it would actually deepen the recession and slow our recovery because of all the job losses that would result. Or they have another choice. The other choice is to make use of the $5.4 billion in budget reserves that they themselves have so carefully and prudently built up over the last decade since the last recession. To address that choice and that question, we're going to hear this morning from a broad and diverse coalition of 18 nonprofit organizations that work directly with, provide services to, and advocate on behalf of hundreds of thousands of Utahns who are most directly affected by the proposed budget cuts. I'll say for our friends in the media that the press release that we're going to be working from is already posted on the Voices for Utah Children website at utahchildren.org. It's the first item on the homepage if you want to follow along the order of the speakers and the list of the 18 participating organizations from there. And then we'll conclude by hearing from a bipartisan pair of legislators from both political parties who are helping lead this effort within the legislature to ensure that we use 10, 20, maybe even 30% of those rainy day reserves that we've built up so that we still have 70 or 80 or 90% left over if we needed them a year or two from now, but at least make use of what we've got, a substantial portion, 10, 20, or 30% of that $5.4 billion in budget reserves to close what's expected to be a budget gap somewhere between $500 million and $1.5 billion. I want to say Jean Hill from the Catholic Diocese was not able to be with us this morning, but she did want to say, if we truly want to render episodes of homelessness brief, rare, and non-recurring, we must invest in housing and supportive services. And now we're going to hear from Alex Cragen from Utahns Against Hunger. Please remember to unmute yourself when you begin speaking, and everyone else, please do stay on mute.
Good morning, and thank you, everyone. My name is Alex Cragen. I'm the food security advocate for Utahns Against Hunger. Utahns Against Hunger is concerned about the Social Services Appropriations Committee's proposed budget cuts. These programs help families weather recessions and ensure a faster overall economic recovery. As a state, we are fortunate to have wisely saved for budgetary shortfalls, and we urge the Utah legislature to consider utilizing our rainy day funds. We urge the Utah legislature to implore our federal delegation to find ways for federal fiscal relief, and we ask our federal delegation to heed that call. And thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex. Now we're going to hear from Mike Harmon, speaking for the Utah Education Association and the Salt Lake Education Association.
Good morning. Currently, I work to support students experiencing homelessness in the Salt Lake City School District and a proud member of the Utah Education Association. I believe it's important to remember that the Utah spends the lowest amount per student in the entire country. There is no fat to cut from the public education budget. Any budget cuts will have a detrimental effect to student success and often have negative effects on our most vulnerable populations. If funding is cut, one of the areas being considered is student health and counseling support. This would be devastating to the students and families that I work with that often have high rates of trauma. Having a trained and certified counselor or social worker in the school to assist students as they deal with this trauma makes a world of difference. Another consideration is class size reduction. Again, this cut would be really hard for the students I work to support. They need more individual instruction, not less. They need educators who have time to provide more individual attention when the rest of their world is falling apart. Students living in homeless situations have additional challenges and do better in classes with fewer students. I implore the legislature to utilize all available tools and resources to not only avoid cuts to education, but actually recognize that public education will need increased investments to help students and families as we navigate through this continuing COVID crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Now we're going to hear from Julie Miller, speaking for Utah Citizens Council, and is herself a retired elementary school principal.
Good morning. As a member of the Utah Citizens Council and a 36-year veteran of Utah Public Schools, both as an administrator and a teacher, I feel strongly now is not the time to make significant decreases to our public education budget. If we lose $200 to $300 million from the education budget for 2021, educators will be forced to delay or forego programs central to the connections children need to thrive as adults. After retiring, I was asked by our district's leadership to accept a one-year position at an elementary school that served homeless families. That year, I watched as teachers struggled with environments so toxic that our limited mental health and social service workers could not overcome them. I stood in awe of teachers who tried to make the impossible possible. For children under 6 who had never been in school, let alone a daycare facility or quality preschool. It made me realize how severe the impacts of toxic stress are on young children. It is stunning, with ample rainy day reserves and other fiscal remedies like bonding, to think that our legislators are considering using more of a sledgehammer than a scalpel to cut education funds. Some of the underserved and ill-advised line item cuts include $10 million in new money for the optional extended day kindergarten expansion and $3 million for preschool programs. The Utah Citizens Council urges our legislators to demonstrate their commitment to public education by recognizing children get one start in life. We can invest now or pay later. We all know the effects of inadequate and inequitable school spending patterns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Now we're going to hear from Zachary Frankel, speaking for the Utah Rivers Council. Zach?
Good morning. Thank you so much. In order for us to weather this pandemic, we need to have empathy and compassion for our fellow Utahns. And we also need to be smart about what we're doing. Right now, the state of Utah is proposing to spend $2.4 billion on the proposed Lake Powell pipeline, which is a completely unnecessary water project for Washington County. The project will require at least a 500% increase in water rates inside Washington County, which is practically an insult coming during this pandemic. And it ignores the abundance of water that's currently inside Washington County today. There's at least 150,000 acre feet of water there, which if you multiply by 4, you get population size. Meaning there's already enough water for 600,000 people inside Washington County. Ample room for growth since the current population in Washington County is only 180,000 people. They could literally triple in size. And yet we're proposing to raise water rates and take services away from precious public services across the board to make way in the state budget for the proposed Lake Powell pipeline, which is completely unnecessary. If that doesn't convince you, consider the fact that the Washington County Water District itself testified they don't intend to take all the Lake Powell pipeline water until the year 2054, 34 years from now. The idea that we would be stripping services away from all of these essential needs that Utahns have today, it's not only a not smart move, it lacks basic compassion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zach. Now we'll hear from Maria Montes of Comunidades Unidas.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Montes, and I'm the Community Engagement Organizing Manager at Comunidades Unidas. The last few weeks have brought to light the inequities that communities of color face daily when trying to access health, education, and safety systems. So it is without a doubt that our state is facing challenges that must be addressed. Our communities are hurting right now. They're searching for ways to move forward. And needless to say that cutting back on the programs that have been created to help close these gaps is hurtful and makes the wrong statements about what Utah stands for at a time when all eyes are on our elected leaders. These programs help tackle intergenerational poverty, provide equitable access to education for those living in low-income communities, and provide access to healthcare for those who cannot afford it. These are the kinds of programs that help us address the inequities created by systemic racism. Today, 40% of those who have been diagnosed with COVID-19 in the state of Utah are Latino, despite this community making up only 14% of the state's overall population. So we believe that as they work to create a budget for Utah's next recovery stages, our state leaders must fight for a plan that is equitable for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Now we'll hear from Tara Rollins of the Utah Housing Coalition.
Thank you, Matthew. Tara Rollins with Utah Housing Coalition. We're a membership-based organization that encourages housing people can afford. The time is now to start investing in the people who hold critical jobs in our community. We continue to witness how dependent we are on low-wage earners through this pandemic. We took it for granted as many of us hunkered down at home to continue to work as people went to work to support us who were privileged. We can do flybys, we can put outside businesses, thanking those on the front line of this pandemic. This is not enough. These are the same people that we say not in our backyard. We're asking the state legislature to hold whole the commitment of $10 million from Senate Bill 39 to invest in affordable housing. We understand there are tough decisions to be made, but the time is not now to cut housing dollars. Based on 2019 State of Utah Affordable Housing Report, 220 low-income households pay more than half of their income to rent, often forgoing necessities like food or medicine, keep a roof over their head. When low-income renters cannot find a decent, affordable apartment, they are more likely to be evicted and risk becoming homeless and sick. Before the coronavirus, there were only 31 rental homes available, affordable and available, for every 100 of the lowest income renter households in Utah. A renter must make $18.30 an hour to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Utah. Utah has over 417,000 jobs that make less than $18.30 an hour. Housing is healthcare. Housing is education. Housing is shelter. Housing is justice. Housing is economic upward ability. Let's start supporting those who make us whole in our community, in our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tara. Next up is Dr. Ellen Brady from Results.
Thank you. Results is a national network of local citizen lobbying groups focused on poverty issues. Accordingly, as the Utah legislature revisits our state budget, we would ask them and our U.S. congressional delegation to reflect on 2 basic questions. First, what are our values as a society? Second, what programs and spending will allow us to rebound the most quickly once the pandemic is over? Some of the resource priorities that should flow in answer to those questions include those needed to provide a strong public health response and ensure access to medical care for those who fall ill, prevent dramatic increases in homelessness and hunger, ensure that our children's education is not irreparably harmed and that return to the classroom can be done safely, and ensure that small businesses can survive to reopen once it's safe to do so. Please also note that control of the epidemic and economic health are 2 sides of one coin. Economic recovery will not occur until, well, the pandemic continues. A second wave seems sure to follow premature reopening and disregard for simple precaution of universal mask wearing and the limiting of gatherings. A second wave will be worse than the first, and another round of shutdown will be even more economically devastating than the first. Furthermore, it will be more difficult to impose restrictions. Accordingly, we ask our leaders to think carefully about their approach to any budget revisions and ask them to think aggressively with regard to the measures needed to ensure local control of pandemic and support of our most vulnerable citizens. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ellen. Next, we'll hear from Pam Silberman with the International Rescue Committee.
Good morning. I'm Pamela Silberman, and I am the Health Program Manager with the International Rescue Committee in Salt Lake City. Since opening our doors in 1994, the IRC has resettled over 12,000 refugees who have survived horrific violence and persecution, but show resilience in their desire to build new lives in Utah. We echo the deep concern raised by our coalition partners here on the line today and would like to call attention to proposed cuts to two critical programs, the Health Clinics of Utah and the School Turnaround and Leadership Development Fund. Refugee and new American families in Utah will undoubtedly be negatively affected by the proposed cuts to these programs. Health Clinics of Utah and Family Dental Plan provide crucial, affordable medical and dental care to refugees, immigrants, and other underserved populations in Utah. The proposed 2% funding cut threatens to shutter these clinics completely. Health Clinics of Utah is one of only 2 clinics in the entire state that meets the requirements to provide federally mandated refugee health screenings for newly arrived refugees. These health screenings help identify untreated medical conditions that may prevent refugees from successfully rebuilding their lives. Both Health Clinics of Utah and Family Dental Plan have the capacity to work with refugees by providing access to interpretation and culturally sensitive care so that patients understand their treatment. The second program cut of concern is the School Turnaround and Leadership Development Fund, which invests in struggling schools to ensure that all Utah students, regardless of what district they live in, can access a high-quality education. Refugee students are at particular disadvantage as they come to the U.S. with little or no previous educational experience and are English language learners. Refugees face many barriers upon resettlement and frequently reside in low-income neighborhoods with under-resourced schools. The School Turnaround Program is proven to be highly effective, with 85% of participating students demonstrating significant growth in their academic success. We are also concerned about other cuts. For example, as the pandemic results in lost income and families become increasingly food insecure, the $200,000 cut to the Child Nutrition Program will remove a lifeline to meals for school-aged children, refugee students among them. As refugees rebuild their lives here in Utah, these programs are critical to their success. Basic health care and support for their children in school set a long-term foundation by which our state and economy will benefit. No one should have to make a choice between putting food on the table or going to the doctor. We urge executive appropriations to see accessible medical care and education as necessary investments in the long-term health and economic security of our state and community. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Now we're going to hear from Andrew Riggle, speaking for the Disability Law Center.
Good morning. During the pandemic, Utahns have stepped up to support each other. Now we need legislators to support them by reinforcing the supports to which we all turn in times of emotional and economic stress. The coronavirus has taken a heavy toll on residents of nursing homes and other congregate settings. Given this, it's particularly unwise to reduce oversight of long-term care facilities. Making it harder to remain at home or in the community is similarly short-sighted. Life's turning upside down for thousands of Utahns. Cuts forcing counties to take more responsibility for community mental health could have long-lasting negative effects. Related gains implementing community treatment are also on the chopping block. With the effort to reduce recidivism in recent years, it doesn't make sense to limit the availability of treatment beds or reentry supports. Likewise, further shifting the burden of high-cost high-need students to districts is untenable, especially when we are funneling millions of taxpayer dollars to subsidize private schools. If these recommendations move forward, Utahns with disabilities and those who are aging could find themselves with no choice but a dangerous institution, forced into mental health crisis or the criminal justice system, or simply left behind. This is why we need our elected leaders to use all the resources at their disposal to protect our most vulnerable friends and neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Next, we'll hear from Dr. William Cosgrove, speaking for the American Academy of Pediatrics, Utah chapter.
Thank you. The 695 pediatricians and pediatric providers of the Utah chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics are dedicated to fostering the physical, social, and emotional health of Utah's children. We recognize that while children comprise only 30% of our population, they are 100% of Utah's future. Our children are the most valuable and the most vulnerable members of our community, and they are most in need of the various safety nets that we as a state provide. 171,791 of our children depend on Medicaid for their physical and mental health care. Yet the legislature is proposing Medicaid cuts to the hospitals, to the doctors, and to the accountable care organizations that serve these children, just when the children's needs are the greatest. 666,000 of our children are in Utah K-12 schools. That's 1/5 of our population. A child's personal success in life and our community's success in the future depend on a fully funded, excellent education. Our legislature is proposing cutbacks to our threadbare, already underfunded public schools. They want to decrease the money that goes to school libraries, to early literacy programs, to school readiness programs. Utah already has the most poorly funded schools in all the states. We have already cut away any fat or any inefficiencies, and any further cuts will be to bone and muscle. These severe budget cuts to children's services are not needed. Why would we cut away portions of our safety nets for children when we have $5.4 billion in our state's bank account? That's approximately 5 times our current need. No parent would let their children go hungry just to keep a larger reserve in the bank. None would keep the family's first aid kit intact and unopened on the shelf when the children are bleeding. It appears that in our time of crisis, our elected leaders are kind of panicky, afraid that our economy will forever stay depressed. They seem to have little faith in the resiliency of Utah businesses or in the tenacity of Utah workers, who are Utah's parents. Yet the scientists tell us that this pandemic will be defeated in a year or two, and the economists tell us that our economy will recover. Our children are our future and our hope. We can't abandon them now, cannot pull a safety net out from under them when they need us most. Our elected leaders should show a bit of courage and faith and use the money in our state's bank accounts and leave our children's safety nets intact. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Now we'll hear from Stacy Stanford from the Utah Health Policy Project.
Yeah, hello. Utah Health Policy Project is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization committed to sustainable healthcare solutions for underserved Utahns. The coronavirus pandemic is exacerbating existing healthcare gaps and disparities, and the legislature's proposed response, up to 10% budget cuts, is very concerning. Rather than rushing to make dramatic cuts to education and social services, our state leaders need to utilize rainy day funds and maximize federal dollars. One source of budget relief for the state is an increase to federal Medicaid funding. After a bump in the Family's First Coronavirus Response Act, more funding is needed and should be added to whatever COVID-19 response package comes up for discussion in the Senate. Medicaid is a crucial part of the response to any health or economic crisis. Enrollment is already increasing as Utahns have lost their jobs and their health insurance due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. They have signed up for Medicaid, an important safety net program that keeps thousands of Utah families healthy and financially secure. The state has already seen the need for this increased funding. Increasing the Medicaid federal match rate by an additional 7.8% as the HEROES Act would, is estimated to provide Utah with an additional $320 million in fiscal relief. This is absolutely not the right time for any cuts. The state needs the budget help that comes from the rainy day funds and these federal funds. The proposal to increase the FMAP already has broad bipartisan support from groups like the National Governors Association, the Association of Medicaid Directors, and America's Health Insurance Plans. We believe that Utah's legislature should pass a resolution supporting increased Medicaid funding, and we will be calling on them to do so. State leaders, rather than cutting life-saving and economy-stimulating programs, should be advocating for more federal fiscal relief. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacy. Now we'll hear from Clint Cottom, Director of the Community Action Partnership of Utah.
Thank you. The Community Action Partnership of Utah is the state association for Utah's 9 community action agencies that help families stabilize and move towards self-sufficiency. CAP Utah has been encouraged by discussions to invest in Utah's future through infrastructure investments. We hope that lawmakers will be just as willing to invest in people and Utah's human capital. Investing in Utahns right now means being cautious about when to make cuts. The full impacts of COVID-19 are still unknown. Stimulus checks, tax refunds, and pandemic unemployment insurance have stabilized rents and mortgages, medical costs, food, and other basic needs for the past several months. But what happens when these resources are gone? Will evictions and homelessness increase? What extra support will minority populations who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 need? What will happen to with future COVID-19 outbreaks? What lost jobs will not return, and how many workers will need time and new skills to obtain employment? How many schools and childcare changes, and how will schools and childcare change over the next coming months, and how will these changes impact working parents? Until some of these questions can be answered, CAP Utah encourages lawmakers to utilize the tools available to them now through the rainy day fund and bonding and avoid devastating budget cuts. This is a way to invest in Utahns as much as possible and ensure a full economic recovery.
Thanks very much, Clint. Now we're going to have 3 speakers from the Circles program. Many of you may know the Circles program is one of the most exciting, most effective, it's a pioneering program here in Utah to help intergenerational poverty folks work their way out of poverty. We're going to start with Benjamin Sessions, the director of Circles Salt Lake.
Good morning. Exactly what you said. We help families in poverty reach self-reliance. And we recognize that our legislature is prudent when it comes to the managing of the finances of the state. This is one of the reasons why we can actually have this conversation. Now is the time to experience the benefits of our fiscal prudence and maintain the current level of services that are being offered to vulnerable families. When the appropriate local and national support, with the appropriate national and local support, many of the potential devastating consequences that come from homelessness, food insecurity, and financial instability can be avoided. And I want to put a fine point on this because last night I had a conversation with one of the mothers in our initiative who is an absolute success story and the reason why we do what we do. She has used state and federal services, but now she no longer does. She has a full-time job with benefits. She saved up enough money for a down payment and she's looking right now at buying a townhome. She is completely self-reliant, and with the help of Circles and the state of Utah and the federal government, she's going to be able to purchase a safe home for her children. These cuts could seriously undermine this story from happening to other mothers and fathers in the state if they fall too far behind. Please reconsider the dramatic cuts in social services. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Benjamin. And now we're going to go to Davis County and hear from Alyssa Belford, who is the youth coordinator and whose family has also been a participant in the Circles program in Davis County. Alyssa?
Hello, everyone. As you were saying, I'm Alyssa Belford. I'm Circles youth coordinator. So my family has firsthand face the barriers of poverty, and we know what it's like to experience a cliff effect and just how important funding is. So as Benjamin was saying, our circles helps families overcome the barriers of poverty and just break the cycle. With funding, Circles is able to encourage many to work towards their dreams and be financially stable. When my mom went through the program 4 years ago, it's the support and lessons from Circle staff that helped her get to where she is today and achieve a bachelor's degree. It also allowed for her teens' voice to be heard about the need for a youth program to address the trauma of growing up in poverty. Although that took months until we had enough money for funding for the curriculum. The less money that's given to programs like ours means less money for services that we can offer, less opportunities for those that need it, less safe places for those that seek it, especially our teens, less food for those that are hungry, and less resources for our teens and kids, and less staff. A major budget cut would hugely impact the support that we can offer. While we work to reduce intergenerational poverty and target the whole family, a major budget cut would hugely impact the support without proper funding towards these programs, my mom would still be in deep poverty with no college degree, to which I probably would follow down the same pathway. Currently, my mom, as I was saying, she has a bachelor's degree in nursing, and I now have my associate's degree at the age of 17. So it just shows how much awesome these programs are in helping, break that cycle of poverty and really just bring the whole family together. While we understand the reasoning behind budget cuts, we assert the importance of funding now more than ever. We might not be dealing with COVID-19 always, but we will all be dealing with the problems that our families face, and for that we need continued funding.
Thank you very much, Alyssa, and good luck at the U in the fall.
Thank you.
Now we're going to hear from Rui Bird, also from Davis County Circles, who is a successful graduate, now preparing to buy her own home. Rui? Don't forget to unmute. There you go.
There we go. Good morning, and I want to say thank you all for spending my break with me. I am an essential worker, so I'm still at work, and so I snuck away for a break, and I'd like to go ahead and go over my story now. So my name is Rui Bird, and I am from Layton, Utah. I am deeply concerned with the budget cuts being proposed. I have received social services on and off for over 30 years. Now keep in mind, from 2001 until about 2017, I did not, and I currently am not, but I'll get into that a little bit more. I am a product of intergenerational poverty, amplified by drug use, and passed this way of living to my 6 children. So I truly do have a story that's not the most beautiful story. However, today I'm very comfortable in my own skin. In 2017, I was introduced to Circles USA by a family member. I began as a circle leader in training. I graduated to a circle leader, and most presently now I am an ally for our community who are eager to unlearn what has been taught to so many of us. This program has enriched my life more than I ever believed possible. I am not educated from college, but I have a street degree, with my major being poverty and my minor in drug abuse. I am urging each of you to consider the Raining Day Fund to continue these life-altering programs. It is important to make the investment into people like me who never knew better. I have changed in just over 3 years, from being homeless with my 2 youngest children to applying and when I say our, I mean Circles USA, uncomfortable but necessary budgeting lesson. I am now in the process of buying a house with a down payment of over $11,000. I would have never dreamed of that in my entire life. I have increased my credit score over 150 points. I put in the work with the knowledge and support to change my life by this particular program and by the funding that it's been giving. I volunteered before COVID-19, registering people to vote. And I continue today to educate my family and friends on how important politics are. I hope you consider my plea to help reshape and end the enormous inequality in our community. And I want to share with you that I found a passion in circles in politics that I never even cared about before. But I do understand nowadays, especially that I have grandchildren. I started my family very young. I do understand how important politics are, and I do try to share that with my family and with my friends. And so I want to thank you all for your time today. And I would again ask you to please consider tapping into the rainy day fund to keep these services available for people that truly didn't know any better. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rui. And I understand you were personally responsible for registering about 500 folks to vote in Davis County, so congratulations on that as well.
Thank you so much.
We're now going to hear from Jesse Mandal, Health Policy Analyst at Voices for Utah Children.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. A public health crisis is not the time to make cuts to vital public health services for kids and families. These hasty, unnecessary cuts will reduce or eliminate funding for programs designed to prevent more serious health crises or emergencies. Rather than speed up recovery, many of the proposed cuts will only prolong our current public health and economic crises and deepen hardship for the Utah families most at risk. Proposed cuts include new funding that helps thousands more children obtain stable, continuous health insurance coverage. Cuts include funds for maternal mental health screening and outreach, home visiting programs for at-risk mothers, cuts to Utah's CHIP program, among many others. The pandemic has heightened the deep structural inequalities in our healthcare system and the health disparities affecting Utah families along lines of race and ethnicity. These unnecessary cuts will only widen those disparities, creating more systemic barriers to care, more barriers to racial justice. We urge Utah leaders to instead prioritize health equity in this moment. Prioritize a Utah where all kids and families can stay safe, stay healthy, and thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Now we'll hear our final speaker before we go to the legislators who've joined us. We'll hear from Steve Erickson from Crossroads Urban Center.
Thank you. Perhaps the unkindest cut of all these proposed cuts is that to the General Assistance Program. GA serves some of the most vulnerable Utahns, the poorest Utahns. Many of them are homeless and without any other means of support due to no fault of their own. GA does provide a small and time-limited monthly grant, as well as case management services to these single adults and married couples who are unable to work due to a temporary or a permanently disabling condition. A large percentage of those who receive GA assistance are later found eligible for Social Security disability income due to the work of the good social workers at the Division or Department of Workforce Services, and those who take the other path, who are able to go back to work, are provided assistance in removing the barriers that have put them in the spot they're in. The proposed cut to GA is only $1.5 million, but it is nearly a third of the budget for the program. This would mean that folks who are applying for GA in the middle of the pandemic, as we're going to see caseload demand and service demand increase, just like it did during the Great Recession, those folks will be placed on a waiting list and won't be able to get any services and probably wind up back on the streets. So surely we can do better than that.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Steve. Okay, well, one of the things we all are emphasizing in this is really how grateful we are to the legislators, all the legislators in the legislature. We know how hard they work. We know how little they're compensated for all the time and energy they put in. And so we appreciate all of them. We also know there's a debate going on among legislators right now about what is the best approach here. And so we're very glad that a bipartisan pair of legislators, Representative Suzanne Harrison from Salt Lake County and Representative Dan Johnson from Cache County, were speaking out with their op-ed that's on the screen now in the Deseret News back on May 31st. And we're so delighted that you're able to join us here to share your thoughts on this. I don't know which of you wants to go first, but we'd love to hear from both of you. Thanks very much.
Sure, I'll go ahead. Thank you for joining us. As a state representative in Sandy and Draper and a practicing medical doctor and a mom of 3 children in our local public schools, these budget cuts are a real threat to my patients and my community. One of the reasons I ran for office was my concerns about our underfunded education system. My daughter had 29 children in her kindergarten class, which is far too many children that are 5 years old for one teacher to handle. For too long, we have asked our schools and teachers to do more and more with inadequate support. And now we face a new challenge. We need to be smart and surgical about how we address potential budget shortfalls. Utah has been wise to prepare for a rainy day. We have levers at our disposal, such as federal funding in the form of the CARES Act and a robust rainy day fund. And because Utah's economy hasn't been hit as hard as the rest of the country, we have potential to bounce back in perhaps a more positive way than other areas. Because of all of this, state leaders need to proceed cautiously without hastily cutting critical parts of the state budget before we have additional information and have considered all of our options. Now is not the time to cut funding for our already underfunded classrooms. If anything, our kids, teachers, and schools will need more support this year as we deal with the health and economic impacts of COVID-19. We must also protect funding for essential social services. These are all the programs that keep Utahns healthy, that keep children and families safe, and help people with mental illness. If we truly want our economy to come back strong, we need to fight to protect our investments in our greatest economic engine, our public education system, our children, and healthy families. Call your state representative and state senator today and ask them to stand up for Utah schools and healthy families and fight these unnecessary cuts. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you, Matthew. I am really happy to have the opportunity to have been able to co-author this op-ed with Representative Harrison. There's nothing more important in the life of a child than a caring adult, and oftentimes that is one of our teachers. I'm really concerned about budget cuts, both in the healthcare area as well as in the education area. If there's ever been a time that we have learned the value of a teacher, it has been now. And it's been very, very difficult for many parents to deal with this change in having to teach kids from home. This exacerbates and points out the need for technology and technology tools to be maintained, because we do not know how things are going to be run when school starts in the fall. It's going to be a difficult situation at best, and cutting some technology sort of things out of our budget now may be a very, very bad idea. So I think that's why we need to be strategic and surgical, as Representative Harrison said, about what we're going to consider. Early literacy is so important for the well-being of a child. You take a program like Upstart, getting 4-year-old children kindergarten ready. That is so important as kids move through early literacy. And we have to consider in education at this time, early literacy. Cutting those sorts of programs like OEK, early options for kindergarten, that can be critical for those children who would miss out on being ready and able to read and compute and to think well by the time they reach 3rd grade. It's so foundational. And then there's this other part about mental health. We've also learned through this pandemic how important mental health is. And many of those crisis situations have caused mental health issues. And that's going to show itself in school this fall. We don't know for sure what's happened within the stress with each individual family. And so we do have to be strategic about how we handle cuts in healthcare and those kinds of services, and the provision of counselors and other sorts of healthcare, mental health care workers in our schools. So there's so much for us to consider as we move forward. And I'm going to also encourage our legislators to make sure that we think deeply about what we're going to cut. Let's keep the things that we know that are research-based, that make a difference in the well-being of a child. And then also those healthcare items that make such a difference in the well-being of families. When we have healthy families, we are going to have a better economy, and it'll come back. And I think we can rely upon it coming back. I don't want us to be too quick. Thank you so much for this opportunity today.
Thank you very much, Representative Johnson. Thank you, Representative Harrison. You're an inspiration to us, and we hope that we're a little bit of an inspiration to you as well, and the other legislators who we know are pushing back against the budget cuts. Nobody jump off yet. This concludes our presentations. Thank you to everyone for sharing today, and we're now going to open it up to questions from the media. I saw Dan Thomas had his hand up, and if Dan, you want to just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I had a question specifically for Pamela Silberman from IRC. Pamela, you mentioned that a couple of the clinics that refugee families depend on have the prospect of going away completely, that they just might fail and no longer be available. Could you go into some detail on what those are and what kind of budget numbers we're talking about from the legislature?
Yeah, so this is the Medicaid clinics. So there are, I believe, 3 state-run medical and 3 dental clinics that are basically administered by the Utah Department of Health. And they serve primarily Medicaid recipients. And I'm looking at the 2% cut, and it's $4,220,000. And so, these clinics, there are a limited number, especially the dental clinics that accept Medicaid, and so not having specific Medicaid funded clinics is really problematic. All refugees receive Medicaid for their first 8 months in the United States and come to the United States not having had access to health care for their entire lives and never had dental care. And particularly the Medicaid only funds emergency dental services for adults, but many of our clients do need to access those. And one of the biggest barriers is lack of interpretation when folks do receive medical care, especially private dental clinics don't have contracts with interpreting services, but the state clinics do. And so they really provide a type of care that's unique and much needed by the refugee population.
Okay, but what you're saying is that these clinics could simply go away and the state would have to start over in this area when more funding is available.
Or not see that it's their purview to provide state-run clinics, right? We see healthcare in the United States as a money-making opportunity rather than a right. And so basically the deficit that these, the option on the list is either to reduce the operating deficit or close the state-run medical and dental clinics. And so, they're running at a deficit because Medicaid reimbursement rates are probably not adequate to, and I think UHPP can probably speak to that better than I can. We need to not see healthcare as something that's money making, but rather a right for individuals in our country. As Maria Montes spoke to, we're seeing COVID has revealed huge problems that we knew existed in our Medicare medical system, and this is just going to exacerbate that by limiting care for the most vulnerable.
All right, thank you.
Great. Any other questions from members of the media? You can unmute yourself or put something in the chat if you need me to unmute you, or if you want to just put the question in there. Now, I'll also say for any members of the media, for any follow-ups, just shoot me an email. I can quickly get you contact information for any of the folks that participated here, any of the individuals, any of the 18 organizations who are happy to talk further with our friends in the media. All right, well, since I don't see any other questions, I'm going to wrap up. I just want to close by saying to everyone, thank you for participating. Thanks for helping send this message. I want to thank everyone for all that you're doing. I know many of the participating organizations have been sending out action alerts. I know that with the one that Voices has sent out, we've already had hundreds of messages going to legislators from all over the state. We still have time. It's still another week until the special session. So thanks everyone for hammering this message, for getting the message out, for letting the public know, because when the public knows what the choices are, we're confident that our Utah legislators will make the right choice and they'll do the right thing for Utah's future and use those rainy day reserves that they themselves worked so hard to build up. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.